So our objective in this session is to try and set out what the legal principles are and how they work in practice, and what, as is apparent, something needs doing, what should be done. And we want to stress the importance of the law in this respect, the importance of getting at the truth of what's happening in another country, because it's such an important part of the foundation of justice, the foundation of the way countries are properly governed, and of ensuring a better international order. And we intend to look at 4 questions. We'll start with the simple one, or not so simple maybe: what's the law, what are the rights? Then we'll turn and look at what's the reality. Then we want to explore what devices governments get up to try and show that they're complying with telling the truth. And then finally, we'll turn around and ask what should be done to make things better. And I'd like to start by asking Dr. Tim Eicke, who was, until very recently, a member of one of the foremost courts that deals with human rights on an international basis, the European Court of Human Rights, what the legal position is, because we ought to start with the law.
Thank you, John. As you indicated, the right to freedom of expression, and therefore the right of journalists to seek out information and to impart information to all of us, is recognized by international human rights law as an essential foundation of a democratic society. And that goes both to information, it also includes information that is unpopular or even offensive. And that is so foundational that it has been recognized both in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 19, the European Convention on Human Rights, Article 10, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights under Article 19. Now, in that context, it's been recognized very early on that journalists have to have a right to seek out information in order to hold those in power to account. And to do so should not be subject to any restrictions unless they are absolutely necessary, for example, in the interest of national security or public order, and are proportionate to that requirement. And again, the courts have recognized that that should mean no restrictions, if at all possible, on the free movement of journalists, whether it is across border or to areas of certain areas of interest, be it conflict or natural disaster or the like. That, I think, is where we're starting in terms of international human rights law under Article 10. There's also recognized, for example, under the right to life, Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights, Article 6 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, that if a death has occurred which involved a journalist potentially in the exercise of their professional occupation, that there are special duties to investigate whether the death was caused or a contributing factor was the fact that they were acting as a journalist, and that they should therefore, there should be a specific attention paid to that criterion and that question in order to avoid anything like this happening again. The third item I want to mention, before perhaps we'll open it up, is international humanitarian law, the law governing armed conflict. And under Article 79 of the first additional protocol to the Geneva Conventions, journalists who are engaged in dangerous activities in the context of armed conflict are subject to a special provision which was put into, as I said, Article 79 of the first additional protocol, at the instigation of the United Nations General Assembly, which in the 1970s already recognized that in the context of armed conflict, journalists are particularly exposed and are in need of protection from hostile actors. And therefore, in both the international humanitarian law, the law that governs war, and human rights law that primarily governs the state of law in states of peace, journalists enjoy a heightened and very special protection because of their essential function in the context of a democratic society.
Thank you very much, Tim, for spreading the law. Can we turn to the practice? Because I think it's very important to see how these high standards operate in practice. And I'd first like to ask Wael, the Gaza Bureau Chief and Senior Correspondent of Al Jazeera, who's well known throughout Qatar and much of the Middle and East, to reflect on how those high principles work in practice, in particular by reference to its experience in Gaza.
Thank you so much for this question. Thank you for all of the participants for joining the session. This is in fact a dilemma. There is a huge gap between theories on one hand and the implementation of these theories on the other hand. And I believe that law and international law, most specifically these international legislations, they are maybe the pillar of these theory, the pillars of this theory. We as journalists pay huge costs, we face challenges, we face threats, we face risks and dangers, and we feel that these legislations, these pillars of our rights, are kept unimplemented and neglected, if I may say. I feel that these legislations are not being implemented, are being, strictly highlighted on the international level, but not implemented on the ground where it should actually be implemented. And this is a dilemma that we actually talk about, that we actually address as journalists, specifically throughout the past couple of years. If we look at what have happened in Gaza, Gaza is under Israeli occupation for over years, and throughout the years we were paying a lot of costs, we were facing a lot of challenges as journalists. The journalists or the rights of journalists were violated. We were not only violated but rather restricted. We were not allowed to move, we were not allowed to travel, we were not allowed to have access to info and to do our work, and we were actually targeted. During the last war, this genocide that has been going on in Gaza for approximately 2 years, that was the cherry on top for all of these violations committed by the Israeli army. Who would have thought that 2 years of war is enough for Israel to kill more than 257 journalists? We're talking about 257 and even more. They were targeted. They were killed whilst doing their job, and we also have hundreds of injured journalists. Our families as journalists were also targeted and killed only because they are linked and tied to us as journalists and as investigators, or maybe as workers in the media level. No one knows what happens in Gaza. The work of journalists in Gaza doesn't look like any type of journalistic effort all around the world. Being a journalist in Gaza is a unique experience. Why? Because the Gaza Strip is a very small area, 40 kilometers in length and 7 kilometers in width. So it's a very small strip, closed from all sides. We as journalists do not perform like other colleagues and fellow journalists all over the world. We work in this very small, overcrowded, overpopulated area. We were born there, we lived there, we belong to that region. Our families live there, and the circumstances are unique. And when this war started, we've sensed risk and danger and threats since the very first minute. We witnessed the intensification of the blockade. The crossings were closed. Israel also shut down electricity, shut down connection to internet and to satellites. The journalists and Israel asked the journalists to call the Gazans to leave the strip. And of course, as you know, we have invested as journalists in this career in order to live, but also in order to provide the world with that access to real info. We were asked to leave our bureaus, our offices. We were asked to leave our regions and to be displaced one time after the other. So journalists in Gaza work in such circumstances. When we are targeted, we are not targeted alone. We are targeted with fellow journalists, with colleagues. Our offices are also targeted, our family members, our friends. Our daughters or our sons or our nephews or our uncles or granddaughters or grandchildren, all of these people were also targeted with us. All of that was targeted with us. We were operating in Gaza in unrealistic circumstances, but we kept working. For instance, when Israel couldn't find any evidence on tarnishing our transparency and our reputation, the Israeli army starts targeting our family. So this is what happened to me, to myself, to my family. I was very transparent, I was very professional, and I deployed, or I was making a lot of effort to prevent Israel and all other parties from, of course, tarnishing my reputation or maybe accusing me of something that I am not. And I made a lot of effort to make sure of that, but unfortunately Israel did something even more damaging than tarnishing my reputation. It targeted the Israeli army targeted my own family. Half of my family died, the other half got injured. They were forced to leave one region to another, and as a journalist I was forced to make the hardest decision ever. My family was half dead, half injured. What will I do now? Will I leave? Will I stop working? Will I keep working? Everyone, the world was watching me. The world was waiting for that journalist who lost his family to make an existential decision, if I may say, a huge decision. And my own decision was, of course, would have had an impact, or had an impact, on the career of all of the journalists, on the context in Gaza. Everyone was waiting for Wael Dahdouh to take a decision on that level. So I was torn between two opposites: my professional career, my responsibility, and the remaining family members that needed my help and needed my support. And I left them since the very first day of war, and I went to work without even, of course, providing them with the minimum of support. So I left them during very hard conditions, very hard circumstances, very dangerous circumstances, and then I lost half of them. And if I decided back then to keep working, I would have left the remaining members of my family alone again. So these are dilemmas that journalists in normal context do not face. But of course, we had to keep going. We couldn't back off. We couldn't stand still, because these facts, this reality, was targeted by the Israeli army. And our professional message, if I may say, our professional mission also was our responsibility. There are a lot of journalists who lost their lives to protect this mission, to protect these values. And we, as journalists, we as colleagues, we must stay loyal to those martyred colleagues in order to keep the mission going, to protect these values, and it's for the sake of the humanity.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Wael. And can I next turn to Christina Lamb, who's the chief foreign correspondent of the leading British newspaper on Sundays, the Sunday Times. And I was going to ask her to reflect maybe on Gaza, but on other conflicts, how the position of journalists is in practice, as opposed to the legal position that's been described by Tim Eicke.
Thank you. And can I first of all just pay tribute to Wael and the journalists of Gaza? you've heard the kind of sacrifice that they've gone through. We would not know what was going on in Gaza if it was not for them. So I think that they've been very brave. And also just like to thank the Doha Forum for having this panel, because, you know, we're living in a time of growing authoritarianism and declining democracy, and freedom of the press is an integral part of protecting democracy. So I feel very strongly, of course I do, I'm a journalist, but that we need to protect this. So I've been working as a foreign correspondent, mostly covering conflict, since the late 80s. I started very young. And I started out covering the war in Afghanistan when it was under Soviet occupation. At that time, I thought I was protected as a journalist by the Geneva Convention, as Tim mentioned. I knew I was taking risks because I was covering a war, but I felt that if anything happened to me, it was because I was unlucky or I did something stupid. I did not think anybody was trying to target me as a journalist. I would say the latter half of my career, so really the last 24 or 5 years, things have totally changed. Journalists have become targets in a way that we were not before. We wear a special thing to a blue press vest with white letters saying press. British soldiers think it's very funny to come and press, which actually loses its humor after it's happened to you a number of times. But I actually increasingly feel that we shouldn't wear those, because there are people that are targeting us much more than they're actually targeting military. And this is a really sad situation. I've also seen in those years other things I never thought I would imagine seeing, like hospitals being targeted regularly, schools and universities, whether it was in Syria or, of course, recently in Gaza, where I think all 12 universities have been targeted. So, you know, we have the law, as Tim talked about, but, you know, in practice, a lot of people are ignoring it. Gaza is a very extreme example of this, where Israel has really tried to control the narrative by not allowing access. We cannot go as international journalists. Even after the ceasefire, nothing has changed. We still don't have access, and it doesn't even seem to have been discussed as part of the ceasefire negotiations, which I find rather worrying. But it's also part of a pattern, and I just fear that it's being normalized, that people are not even seeing this as something absolutely outrageous. So many countries now restrict access to journalists. They think that it's okay to target journalists. They imprison them regularly. They make our life very difficult. They often shut down the internet. There are other countries which are extremely difficult for us to get access to, not just Gaza. So Afghanistan, for example, which is a place very close to my heart because I've spent so much time there. And as we all know, the situation for women and girls is absolutely horrific. They do not give visas to Western female journalists to go anymore. The first couple of years the Taliban were in power, it went 3 times, but then they changed the system and we can't go and report what's happening on the ground. There are plenty of other countries where they make it extremely difficult for us to get visas, places like Iran, Belarus, we can't get into Russia. And sometimes, even if we can get into those places, they really restrict our ability to operate. So Iran, for example, you have to have a government minder, and you have to pay $500 a day for the privilege of having this minder. So, you know, I have to say that I've really seen reduction of the space for media to operate in the last 20 years. And it's not just in dictatorships. We're also seeing in countries that we regarded as sort of bastions of the free press, such as the United States, the White House now bringing in restrictions, only allowing access to journalists that they like. So this is all part of a worrying trend, I think.
Thank you very, very much indeed for adding to that picture. Can I go now to the fourth member of the panel, Professor Fatima El-Issawi, who's a journalist, but also a professor of journalism at the University of Essex, and ask her for her perspective on the law as it is implied in practice.
Thanks. Thank you, John. I have to mention that I used to be a reporter for international media in the Middle East before getting to academia. So I come from the practitioner side, not the law side. I have to say that, as Christina was saying, I mean, the level of pressure, attacks, threat, denigration against journalists is unprecedented in the last decade. What we're seeing in Gaza is unprecedented because of the level of killing of journalists. It's the deadliest conflict for journalists in the last decade. As per Media Watchdog, we have more than 250 journalists, local journalists killed, and the killer is even not hiding. They are taking responsibility and also celebrating this killing. Local journalists being belittled, accused of being terrorists, threatened, denigrated, and so on. I have to say that attacks against journalists is also and mainly attacks against the public's right for information and the efforts against disinformation, because those journalists, the frontline journalists, are the ones who are fact-checking information that we can trust, and they are bringing to us the story from places there are incredible dangers to be there. My last research was turned, into frontline journalists. I did a series of interviews with Lebanese frontline journalists. And the stories they told me are incredible. Lebanese journalists were attacked from the first weeks after the start of the war. They knew that they are becoming the target. They become the story. And most of them decided to continue because they felt that when the cameras will stop rolling, then the public, not only the international community, but the Lebanese public will think that there is nothing happening. And some of them continued to work despite knowing that they can be killed. They saw, they witnessed, they reported on their colleagues being killed, and they decided to continue because they knew that without them, there is no story. And for them, the word safety has no meaning, because what do you mean? How can you preserve and guarantee safety if journalists are being attacked and killed while wearing clear sign of press? Of course, we have a case of Issam Abdallah, the Reuters photojournalist, which being now taken to a legal case by the Lebanese government, although we don't have much details about how this will happen. The third point I want to stress, and I'm not sure we should continue to stress it again and again, that without international media getting into the field, we have less information, but we continue to have information thanks to local journalists. And these local journalists are the ones that provided coverage from extremely dangerous zones, not only in Gaza, Syria before, the change of regime, nowadays Sudan and Yemen, which are extremely dangerous zones for coverage. International media decided to withdraw because of the level of danger, and the work is being left to local journalists who are not covered by insurance, who are less protected, have less financial resources and training, and they are doing the job because this is not only part of being journalists, professional journalists, it's part of their belonging to their community, to their culture, and most of them see it also as a duty towards their community. So thanks to them, we are being informed, and I cannot stress enough how their role is important.
Well, thank you all very much for looking at what the current position is and what governments are doing in failing to enforce the rights. And I'd like now to turn to the fourth of the questions we wanted to consider, and that is what can be done to try and bring practice to the level that the law requires, because the enforceability of the law is one of the really key themes of this conference. And I'd like to begin, Wael, with you. What should we do to try and ensure that we get the truth and journalists aren't treated in the way in which they are?
We should start individually, every journalist, every reporter, every institution, every media organization in this current world order that raises the flag of freedom and of rights. We must individually ask this question. Do we really want to protect the freedom of speech? Do we really want to protect the right to have access to info? Do we really want to protect these journalists and these reporters? If the answer is yes, then we have a series of steps and measures that we should implement on the individual level, on the institutional level, on the governmental level, on the level of parliaments, on all levels. We have a lot of responsibilities. We have a series of steps that we must implement. This question holds the authorities responsible. So all of these stakeholders, all of these individuals and institutions should start to work individually. All of the journalists who are inside of Gaza or outside of Gaza, all of the journalists who are covering, of course, armed conflicts are not protected when the perpetrators of those violations and crimes are not held responsible. They will keep perpetrating, they will keep committing these crimes and violations. And if Israel was held responsible, it wouldn't have committed all of these crimes in front of the whole world. And I would like to remind you that many of these violations, many of these crimes against journalists happened live on air. Do you remember the tent that was burning live on air? Our fellow journalists, our colleague journalists were burning live on air in front of the eyes of the world in that tent. And everyone saw that scene. Everyone was watching that scene. 5 of our colleagues were killed in front of everyone in the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis too, when the Israeli army targeted a camera for Reuters, and when my colleague journalists rushed to protect their friend Samer al-Masri, the photograph, Israel hit the area or hit the spot one more time, which led to a massacre that, of course, killed approximately 5 journalists and injured many. Some of them did not have access to medical services and medical treatment. So the world has a lot of responsibilities, but we must, of course, decide to be responsible. We as journalists have lost friends, family members and colleagues, and we were left alone. We were faced by a biased perspective, and we were left to die and to burn day after day. The world was just watching us.
The world was watching while Israel refused to host a single inquiry commission, even though no inquiries were needed because the massacres were happening live on air and live streaming. But the local authorities did not receive a single inquiry commission. Even after the ceasefire agreements, we have colleagues who were killed with airstrikes while doing their job in the field. Some lost their families, some were killed with their families at home. The war, the genocide may have stopped in their traditional form, but the war against Gaza, against the people of Gaza, against the values and message of Gaza, against journalists is still ongoing, and we are, as journalists, still paying for this. The world can do a lot. I understand the language of politics. Israel understands the language of pressure. No one can convince me that Israel faced true pressure from the world. It has not faced real pressure from the world, or else it would have been stopped. It has not faced any pressures, any measures against it. It has not been held accountable, not a single time, for all the murders of journalists and others. Was Hind Rajab a journalist? Was she in the field? Journalists wearing their blue vests, their helmets, the helmets and the vests on which you have TV and press written on. These are the people who were targeted. Ruins everywhere, houses, hospitals targeted, people killed, people set aflame, everything in front of the eyes of the world. Some institutions issued statements, shy statements. Some took shy measures, none of which are appropriate given the blood spilled in the Gaza Strip, none of which adequate with the massacre, the killing, the murder in Gaza, the murder of journalists and civilians equally. People can do a lot across the world, but as I said, they need to respond morally. Are they willing to do what should be done or not?
The peace deal about this. What else do you think can be done to address something that affects all of us?
Was so Wael spoke rather passionately about the lack of accountability, and that's one of the problems. We have the law, as Tim spoke about, the international humanitarian law is there to protect us, but that law is only as strong as the will of political leaders to implement it, and that's what we're not seeing. And we as journalists, you know, we can make representations. We all have been. We've written endlessly to embassies of Israel, to the government of Israel, asking for access to Gaza. And it doesn't achieve anything because we don't have any leverage over the government of Israel. We need political leaders to be saying to Netanyahu, this is not acceptable. You can't just block off. Of course, the Israelis is saying, oh, this is for our own welfare because it's too dangerous in Gaza. Well, I think that should be our decision. I regularly report from front lines in other countries, you know, Ukraine, was recently in Democratic Republic of Congo. You know, that's my job. It's up to me to assess the danger. It's not a government's decision to tell me where I can and can't report from, I believe. So, you know, I think there's a limit to what we as media can do. We can and are making endless representations, but it really hasn't achieved anything. And I would again say that this is, you know, if a country is allowed to normalize this kind of behavior, then lots of other places are going to do the same thing. And that, you know, we're also, I talked about speaking here at a time of declining democratic freedom, but we're also living through a time of fake news, of a lot of mistrust in media. And so it's so important that we're there on the ground, you know, otherwise we can't tell people exactly what's going on. And so, you know, it's kind of ironic situation that we're being restricted by the same people who are accusing us of not giving a fair picture. How can we give a fair picture if they don't give us access?
Thank you very much. And Fatima, can I turn to you? We've talked about normalizing things. What do you think should be done from your experience of academia and of being a journalist to try and get the rights of which Tim has spoken enforced?
I think the first word that come is impunity, and is for Tim to explain how this law can be implemented and enforced, but I don't see any way, unless there is lobbying, pressure coming from the political sphere, and also the other, not only media, but politicians, but governments. And I have to say, not only in the West, but also in the Arab world, because we did not see such much solidarity or pressure coming from Arab regime, honestly, as a reaction to what's happening, in Gaza, in the region, in Sudan, in Yemen, and so on, in Syria, and internationally. The other important thing is solidarity, or the lack of solidarity. The question is, can we talk about an international community of journalists? For me, the answer is no, because we are too much divided, and there is a clear divide between those who are protected, well-resourced, trained, international, working for big organizations, and those who are working from inside in extremely dangerous zones without much solidarity coming from their colleague internationally. We saw 140 international media organization issuing calls months after months for access to Gaza, for example. This is coming from big organizations, BBC, Reuters, AFP, and so on. But that's not enough. That's not enough at all. What can we be done is shouting every day. It's, not only for Gaza, but for every situation where journalists are being threatened and killed. A simple thing can be done. First, every and each report coming about Gaza should mention that Israel is not allowing journalists to access the field, at least mentioning this sentence to make it clear that we are not getting full information about what's going on. The other important thing is review our practice to have a reflection on how we are covering these conflicts happening very far away, where most of the time victims are dehumanized, are treated as being figures, numbers, and their humanity is being denied, and very much the story is being sanitized, because as someone I follow on social media, I follow on Arab media, I follow in international media, I had two different stories. One coming from footage from inside Gaza, for example, with horrific scenes of killing. And another one, very quiet, polite, sanitized, coming from international media, British media, because this is where I live and I follow daily on the news. And this is not acceptable, because what's happening is not acceptable. What's ugly is the crime. And not reporting on an ugly crime is also ugly.
Thank you very much. Now,
Can I just push back on that? I mean, I think that's rather unfair. International media, you're talking about British media, we are reporting what is happening. What I'm saying is we don't have access ourselves to be on the ground, but we're reporting from people there.
Fair point. We'll leave it there. We might pick it up in questions. But I want to come back to Tim very briefly to say, you've said what the law is. It's clear it's not being obeyed or enforced, and there's no accountability. Do you just give up, or can you do something?
It is, as you said, John, it is rather depressing to hear these accounts firsthand and to see how the law is not applied or selectively applied. I mean, it's in a sense reassuring to hear from Christina that she felt originally that she was safe, but even in the 1970s, when they negotiated the provision in international humanitarian law, there was a question as to whether they should make it a requirement that journalists identify themselves to enjoy protection. And even then, member states said, no, because by doing so, you make yourself a target. So this is a problem which has been known for a long time. We hear very movingly how it's getting a lot worse. And every couple of years, the UN Human Rights Commission issues a resolution on safety of journalists, impunity. The General Assembly does. and there is no accountability. On the other hand, you have, as an example, very recently in the European Convention space, and I appreciate that doesn't, of course, cover Israel and Gaza and the like, when an action brought by Ukraine against Russia in relation to the events in the Donbass from 2014 and the invasion in 2022, Ukraine, supported by 26 other member states, amongst other things, brought before the court an administrative action of suppression of journalism, which included harassment of journalism, kidnappings, killings, shutting down of transmission, etc. That was heard before the court with submissions from all the parties, and the court found a violation of Article 10 of the Convention on Human Rights. Now, there's then a question of implementing and enforcing that judgment, but there is, therefore, where there is a will amongst the states, there are mechanisms to do that. The question, I think, is in a sense largely political, namely to translate the statements made at the UN level and other public statements into legally enforceable action before the fora in which that is available. That is differently developed across the world, of course, and in Europe it's quite an intense level of kind of regulation, but that seems to me at the moment to be the only way we can get round this complete lack of enforcement, despite, as I said, every couple of years, grand statements both by the UN Human Rights Commission and the General Assembly about how the safety of journalists needs to be protected and how impunity is unacceptable and cannot be left to stand.
What I'm going to do now is to say, I think our clock has stopped working, so I can say that we've got a few minutes left. I just wanted to give an opportunity for one or two questions. Can you keep them, please, as brief as possible? Yes, over here. And then if there are any more, we'll collect 3 questions and get the team to answer them.
Hi, my name is Dahdouh. I'm from South Africa. I was an accidental journalist in Afghanistan in '85.
Could we have a microphone for him?
So let me start again. My name is Dahdouh. I'm from South Africa. And as I said, I was a journalist in Afghanistan in '85 and covered the Bosnian War in '92, '93. So I understand when you say that the kind of journalism that existed then was very courageous and very even-handed. And unfortunately, what I see today is what I term as shameful, especially in terms of what's happening in Gaza. Now, you said, the correspondent from Sunday Times, that Israel controls the narrative. I agree with you, but I think Western media affords Israel an even greater protection by controlling the narrative. So when many organizations say that there's a genocide being committed, the response from Western media should not be, but Israel says there is no genocide. I think you really need to acknowledge that is not journalism. Just my second and last point. I think in democracies, when you say that journalists are free to write whatever they want, I think that is a myth. Because in the UK, there is something called the D notice. And let me just make this point. The D notice is a voluntary act where journalists have to censor themselves. So when the Sun and Mail wrote a story in October 2023 about special forces aiding Israel in the Gaza operations, for 21 months, there was no coverage in the mainstream media. So,
okay, you've made those 2 points. We must get, there's someone who wants to ask a question next to you. Yes?
Thank you very much. My name is
And a quick question.
Yes, very quick. I'm a lawyer from Germany. I just wanted one comment and then one quick question, commenting on, yes, you do report, but the way how you report as the mainstream media is, bluntly to say, it's horrific to what we have seen an ongoing genocide that was made possible because of the mainstream media that reported lies and never really came back to them and cleared that there were no beheaded babies, which was a central point. And it's always like that in genocides, that it's the media that is flustering this. And so I have a question to the judge Eicke on the panel, precisely on that. So there is the responsibility of the media and the international criminal responsibility, and which ways do you see feasible to also hold the media accountable in the Gaza genocide?
Thank you very much. Let's just take one more. Let's do the person who's nearest us quickly, and that will have to be it. And I'm going to ask the panel to be very quick in their answers, or I'll get in trouble. Just use it.
I will use it. My question to Wael, what's your message to the young journalists in the room and the young journalists watching you from Gaza today?
Okay. Now, we've got 3 questions, very briefly, because the time, I'm sure, is terrible, but let's carry on quickly. Wael, do you want to start?
Certainly, there is no doubt that there are things that there is something that we can call the School of Gaza of journalism. Why? Because what is happening in Gaza, what happened in Gaza, should be a lesson to our colleagues, to the emerging colleagues, to the young colleagues, and to the ones with years of experience. What happened in Gaza is truly unbelievable. What happened in Gaza is like something that happens in a prison that is separated, secluded from everything, with no water, with no electricity, with famine, with darkness. But where is the miracle? The voice kept being risen, images kept being shared, information kept flowing to the entire world. And for that reason, a lot of people are changing their convictions. They are changing their position towards Israel and the Israeli narrative and the Israeli point of view, including towards media that are controlled by Israel and its lobbies across the world. There is no doubt that there is a message. But what is this message? In my opinion, the key difference in the role of journalists across the world and what is happening in Gaza is the kind of spirit, the message, the love of this mission, the love of this job, the faith in the role of this job, and the readiness to sacrifice for the job and for the information so that the entire world becomes aware of it. In addition to the violence exercised by Israel and our sense that we as journalists were targeted, whether on the job or not, whether in the field or not. And we need to tell all journalists, whether young or with experience, that journalism is not about fame, it's not about money and wealth and castles and villas and cars. These are very good things. But journalism at the end of the day is a mission. It's a value. And the utmost value is freedom. If we do not defend our own freedom, who will defend it? And for that reason, we need journalists who carry a message, a vision. And this is why we need all other employees, all other workers who carry a message, who carry a mission. And we do not need to think of our job as only a job, but truly as a message, truly as a mission. شكرا جزيلا.
It's very easy to attack the mainstream media. We're used to it. I think many people would have no idea of what's going on in Gaza if it wasn't for the mainstream media reporting what the people on the ground are telling us and talking to them. The same with Afghanistan. I recently went to Democratic Republic of Congo, a completely unreported war. We risk our lives to be there on the front line, telling people. I personally, when I started out, there were very few women doing what I do, and I have spent most of my career trying to tell people about what happens to women in war, uncovering uncomfortable truths like sexual violence in conflict. One of my colleagues, Marie Colvin, was killed in Syria by Assad's forces for trying to tell people what was happening there. So, you know, you can insult us, but we're trying our best. And in terms of the gentleman speaking about freedom in the UK. I agree. I don't think I said that we report freely. I do think that there are problems in the UK. D-notices are not self-imposed, by the way. The government imposes them on us. We don't decide not to report on something. No. You said it was self-imposed, but... well, because we're instructed by government to do it. So, I think there's many other things I can say, but I think we've probably run out of time.
Fatima, do you want a couple of sentences, then Tim, 2 sentences, and that's it?
No, it's just to say that this what happened in Gaza should be an opportunity for media in general to review their practices and to ask questions that are becoming pressing. We shouldn't also forget the important situation of journalists reporting in repressive regimes, and we did not have time to talk about them. Hundreds of journalists are being threatened, in prison, detention, and some worst practices are taking place, unfortunately, in the Arab region. So we shouldn't also forget about them, because they are frontline journalists. Even if there are no wars, they are providing information in incredibly difficult situation. I can, most of the countries, unfortunately, in the Arab world now, it's very, very difficult to report from them independently.
Fine. And Tim, a last word.
Well, I think just on that question about liability, that there's a real issue in the sense, in a system that is regulated and where the law expects regulation, it's also mainstream journalists are subject to a particular responsibility, which the law also recognizes, and that if there were regulation or is regulation, both through an ethics code and through the law, that is being enforced. That's, of course, not something that applies to social media, citizen journalists, and the like. So insofar as there is a regime, liability lies where the criminal law puts it, and in international criminal law, the threshold just is only in relation to crimes against humanities, war crimes, etc., where this, I can't see that going. But it's the absence of regulation, it's the absence of enforcement, both internationally and in many national systems, which creates the problem.
Well, you want to add one final word, and it is a final word. Yeah.
I believe that Israel and those who defend it are like a wolf at the top of a hill telling the lamb that they polluted the water in a well. Israel is trying to do the same. We are professional journalists. We are defending the truth. We are reporting news, and much less. Israel is accusing us of terrorism, of unprofessional behavior, and similar things. But if this clear accusation that is baseless, spineless, and that lacks proof and evidence is still allowing Israel to kill journalists, to murder them, to attack them, to target them, what can we say about Israeli journalists serving in the IDF, working along with the IDF? What can we tell, what can we say about Israeli journalists sitting in the air conditioning, wearing a gun, sharing those words, sharing those thoughts, and saying that these are terrorists? What do we say about a journalist that went with armed men to areas I was born and I was raised in? What do we say to an Israeli journalist who personally pressed the button to blow up a house in the south of Lebanon? And when we asked him, why did you do this? He said, this house oversees the state of Israel. This is the truth that no one wants to believe.
Thank everyone for what has been a very lively and important session, and key to actually the theme of the contest, the enforcement of law. Thank you.